It has been quite a summer in Ontario politics, the first Conservative elected in Toronto since 1999, and yet some serious grumbling about the PC party leader's effectiveness. And of course, the gas plant story that just never ends. Let's look back and ahead with, in alphabetical order, Maria Babbage with Canadian Press, Adam Radwanski from the Globe and Mail, Martin Redcon of the Toronto Star, and Scott Stinson from the National Post. And we welcome you four Queen's Park watchers to our studio. Hope you had a good summer, and we're happy to dive in right now. Okay, the by-elections, let's start there. 5 by-elections on the 1st of August, 2 for the Liberals, 2 for the New Democrats, 1 for the Conservatives. A real split decision. What were the people trying to say?
It's hard to say what people are trying to say because almost every one of them can be taken on its own merits. I mean, if you go through, the local candidates matter so much. If you take Etobicoke as an example, the Tories won that because they had an excellent candidate in Doug Holliday. If you take Windsor, which the NDP won, they won because they had the strongest candidate there. If you go to Ottawa, which is one of the 2 the Liberals held on to, that was largely because it was sort of the McGuinty effect. That's the one place where the McGuinty effect wasn't hurting them because that was his old riding. What I thought was kind of interesting about the way it played out was that if you'd asked me at the start, what's the kind of the outcome that would let all parties spin reasonably positively, I would have said 3-1-1, right? If the Liberals won 3 and each of the opposition parties won 1, then the Liberals could, they could all kind of claim a positive spin on the thing. The Liberals had won a majority available, and the other 2 parties could say they'd made a dent. As it happens, to the 2-2-1 result, instead with the NDP winning 2 and the Liberals only winning 2, you'd think that would put all the heat on the Liberals. What's interesting is that the way it played out, because of the way the Tories kind of turned on each other right away, the whole storyline out of it has instead been about how bad it was for the Tories, which is odd.
And hold off on that. Yes. We're going to get to that. Split decision? How do you infer what the people were trying to say with that?
I can't. All I can rule out is that there is no love of the leaders in the land. There's no Trudeau mania, Jack Layton mania sweeping Ontario. Wynne has not electrified the province. Andrea Horwath is popular but isn't able to overcome her own barriers as an NDP leader. And there is definitely not Hudak mania sweeping across Ontario. That said, you don't have to necessarily be a popular leader to be a winning leader in a general election. And so I'll just say by-elections, past performance in by-elections is no indicator of future performance in a general election. So there are limits to what we can infer from it.
Maria, given how unpopular the government is in some circles, some people were saying this should be 0-5 for the Liberals. It would be shocking if they won anything. And yet they won 2. So do they walk away from this feeling pretty good?
I don't think they should. When Kathleen Wynne spoke, when the by-election results were in, she, I thought, made a very strong statement about how they mishandled things like the gas plant controversy. She talked about how the voters had given her a verdict and she'd heard it. And then I think she said some things that were stronger than she'd said before about the McGuinty administration, saying that the way they handled gas plant cancellations was very secretive. So I think she realized that this wasn't a win for them. They were lucky to keep the seats that they had. But again, I would agree with my colleagues that by-elections are really not, I think, a litmus test of how a general election would go. It's an opportunity really for people in those ridings to vote for the best candidate and to vote on local issues as well. So they're actually freed up from the consequences of what is the government going to look like and being able to vote more in a local sort of context.
I'm scratching my head a bit here because I think I remember when the Parti Québécois was in power in Quebec decades ago, I think they lost 16 by-elections in a row. And when you're unpopular, that's what happens.
Right.
The Liberals won 2 of 5. So how much stock do we put in the opposition comments that the public can't stand this government and are desperate to get rid of them?
Well, it's interesting. In both those cases, so in the one, as Adam said, it was Dalton McGuinty's old riding. And I think a lot of observers thought that riding was totally up for grabs. And as it turns out, old memories last, and a place that has been Liberal for as long as anyone can remember remains Liberal. And the other one, which is the Scarborough riding, there was the whole subway thing where mid-campaign, the Liberals announced that, we're going to turn the light rapid transit plans into a subway, and their candidate had subway champion on her sign, and it was all about delivering a subway for Scarborough, which was a complete 180 from the way the Liberals had been before. So yes, they managed to hold on to that one Toronto seat, but at what cost? How much have they damage their sort of total transit vision by doing this one move towards a subway, and in an area where they didn't particularly need a subway because they had this other plan already. So, to a certain extent, yes, they won a couple things, but I do sort of wonder, for all the same reasons we've been talking about, I don't know that they can read a whole lot into it in terms of what this means for the next general election. There were some unique circumstances here. It allowed them to save a couple seats, but whether that suggests, general voter interest in the Liberals again, I don't know that I would say that.
And go ahead.
Kind of one takeaway for me is I was impressed in retrospect by the audacity of Tim Hudak, the boldness, and I'm not being ironic, in raising the stakes and risking it all by recruiting a high-profile candidate, high name recognition, the former deputy mayor, Doug Holliday, to run in Etobicoke. It was a do-or-die maneuver, and he won. Not by a landslide, but Holliday won with a comfortable margin and broke into Toronto. I don't think it's necessarily, again, an indicator that they have established a beachhead from which they can conquer Toronto. But for a guy who lost in London unexpectedly, the Tories lost a seat they probably should have won in London to the NDP and were upstaged. If they hadn't won Etobicoke, they really would have been screwed, 0 for 5. Instead, they were 1 for 5, and even though by-elections may not matter, the optics are still a target for us in the meeting.
Let me pick up on the NDP story, because the NDP, in the 2 seats they won, one expected in Windsor, one in London, a big shock, but then in 2 other seats, Lakeshore and Scarborough-Guildwood, they barely got their deposit back. If you're a New Democrat today, what are you supposed to read into the fact that you win 2 that you didn't have before, and you're a complete non-entity in 2 seats you used to be fairly competitive in?
Well, the one thing none of us talked about in the first round there is that so much about by-elections is organization, right? It's on-the-ground resources. And what this demonstrated to us, again, we've seen it before, is that the NDP is very good at pouring a lot of resources into 1 or 2 ridings and flooding it in between union support and between their own volunteers and everything else, and just out-muscling the other parties. That's what happened in a couple of the ridings. It's also why the Liberals kept the riding like Ottawa South largely. They had a better organization. So if you're the NDP, I think you'd have to be pleased with a couple of things. One is that, look, you do have enough organization to win some on-the-ground battles. The second thing is you did recruit well. In the ridings we had a chance. I mean, they out-recruited the other parties in the 2 ridings they won, and they had a decent candidate in Ottawa as well. So they certainly did reasonably well on that front. I guess what you have to be concerned about is what happens when you win a general election where 107 ridings are up for grabs and you can't flood them. And I don't see much indication yet that when the NDP isn't pouring everything they've got into a riding, that they can necessarily win there. And last time their on-the-ground organization actually wasn't that good in the general election when it spread more thinly. So I think the concern for them is, yeah, they can pick up now, but can they really compete when it's more about the so-called air war and it's more about more thinly spread resources?
Okay, but Maria, there are 20 seats now. And 20 seats, if you take out the 1990 majority government, which some would argue was a bit of an anomaly, 20 seats is sort of back to their historical where they usually are. It's certainly a long way from the 8 or 10 they had when Howard Hampton was the leader. So can you say the NDP is back and a big player now?
I would hesitate to say that.
You're not going there yet?
No, I mean, by elections, I'd love to be able to use them as a crystal ball and say this is where things are going. But I think Adam's right. There's a lot of resources poured into by-elections. The NDP have benefited tremendously from that. I think it does show that, and we've seen this in the polling, that Andrea Horwath is a very popular leader. But when it comes down to a general election, is that going to bring them into opposition? Or are they just going to remain the third party? And I think that question is something that she's going to be thinking a lot about in the next few months as we, look at the possibility of an election next year, I guess.
Martin?
Can I throw something else into that? Yes, she's popular, but remember, as popular in the job she's doing as third party leader, not necessarily the most popular to be premier. But I think we should recognize that the NDP did recruit some impressive candidates in Windsor, in London. But they perhaps over-recruited in Scarborough. I think that particular candidate, they may have outsmarted themselves, Adam Jambroni, a former TTC chair, a very high-profile politician who tried to become mayor of Toronto, dropped out in a bit of a scandal when he confessed to having an affair and cheating on his then girlfriend, his fiancée, etc. But I think the NDP was almost greedy in trying to win that third seat, with a candidate who also created real ripples with the local riding association and a very controversial nomination. Resignations now in that NDP riding association, lots of email traffic from people saying that he broke the rules, and that the party establishment muscled in there. So I think you're right, the NDP does do by-elections well, sometimes overreaching.
Was it a mistake to have Adam Giambrone contest that seat? I mean, he's a downtown Toronto politician. There he is running out in Scarborough.
You know, the interesting thing, the way I thought that broke out, it might end up benefiting the Conservatives by having a strong NDP candidate and a reasonably well-known Liberal candidate that maybe they would fight for the votes and the PCs would end up kind of coming up the side. And they almost did. They did much better in that riding than I think most of us expected going in. But, you know, I think the evidence of was it a mistake is in the results, and as Martin points out, you have the riding association somewhat in tatters, and Adam Giambrone was a party executive member, so it looked like that whole favoritism kind of thing. That's generally not been the NDP's modus operandi. Is you know, they're sort of the party of the grassroots and the little people, and to kind of have this idea that the executive was coming in and muscling out a preferred local candidate was a bit of a surprise. So if anything, it kind of hurts their brand, I think, with maybe the people that might be likely to vote for them next time around.
Okay.
And those are, I mean, those people who are upset by his becoming the candidate, despite having, you know, conducted a candidate search and then decided he wanted to run, is that you're upsetting the volunteers who are going to get the vote out for you. So it's really a self-defeating thing. I was actually kind of surprised that Andrea Horwath was doing as many photo ops with him as she did. I mean, good for the leader to go out and support her candidates, but she was there quite a lot, and I was a bit surprised by that. I thought that, you know, some of the NDP party members might feel slighted by that.
Maybe just a test drive for the next general election?
I guess, I mean, I understand why Adam Giambrone wanted to run there, because any kind of new profile and sort of reestablishing your legitimacy as a candidate, and maybe that was the idea, let's get him some more profile somewhere. I did find it weird too, though, and I guess by-elections, particularly because they're sort of a hurried process of finding a new candidate, they do cause leaders to make strange decisions. I mean, although they shouldn't have been that hurried. If you look at the Liberals in London with Ken Curran, the former teachers union president who ran there, they clearly hadn't vetted him properly, because, you know, in the first week his candidate basically fell apart. His candidacy fell apart because his resume didn't hold up.
He came third.
He came third. And within about a week of that, they were all saying, well, we made a big mistake with this one. Giambrone, the odd part is that Andrea Horwath never seemed to think a week or two in, after some bad press and so on, well, this was a mistake. I think she kind of dug in. Maybe that's to her credit, but I think it was one of those odd decisions that gets made in the heat of the moment.
Okay, let's, Martin, focus now on the Conservatives. You would think that in a summer where the Conservatives win their first seat in Toronto in 14 years, that would be an unambiguously good news story for the Progressive Conservative Party of Ontario. After all, they've gone 0 for 66. And if you add up all the potential, you know, 22 seats, 3 elections in a row, nothing. And yet, in the immediate aftermath of the by-elections, the knives start to come out for Tim Hudak in a very public way. How come?
Well, we should go back 2 summers, because we've had 2 summers worth of by-elections, 7 altogether. One of them was, in fact, a Tory-held seat in Kitchener-Waterloo, the summer of 2012, and he's 1 for 7 in by-elections. So there is and the London defeat to the New Democrat came as a real surprise, I think a bitter shock to the riding members, and it's the London Tories who have started this grassroots appeal to try to have a leadership review at the scheduled policy conference later this month in September. I don't think it's going to go anywhere. I think the party establishment is firmly against it. Even the Mavericks and the leadership rivals have declared their loyalty to Hudak. There is some dispute over what the best approach in terms of process. Do you muzzle this? Do you stop it before it gets to the floor? Or do you let it go through this procedural resolution and then stop it in the floor itself in a very transparent way? I don't think we'll be talking about this personally a month from now. I think when it's over, it'll be over, and we'll be looking ahead to the next election. But to your question, why did this bubble up? I think London was a real shocker, and that's where this dissident movement started. There have been a lot of questions about Tim Hudak for the last few months, but I think they've been more or less set aside until the next vote, because we're in a minority government.
Fair to say, Maria, that regardless of which approach you take to this, it's not helpful for Tim Hudak.
No, I mean, he's really got to watch his back now, because, and I get that opposition parties, when you've been out of power for 10 years, you start to get impatient. And Tim Hudak, when he became leader, they thought, okay, finally, we have the right of center candidate we want. He's going to be the next premier. This is great. Then 2011 happens, the election. They blow their lead. They don't form a government. The 2 by-elections, or the 6 actually by-elections we've had on 2 separate occasions, they failed to make any real gains. I mean, putting aside the 416 riding that they got in this one. I think they're starting to get impatient. The party is getting impatient. They want to get back into power, and if they see some weaknesses on Hudak's side, they're going to try and get him to change that. So I think a lot of the issues too with him is that some see the people who advise him, they don't think that they're giving him good advice. So maybe what he needs to do is simply change what he's doing internally, and that might satisfy some of those people. But I mean, he's in a really tough spot now, like many other opposition leaders before him. So
well, it's the worst job in politics, right?
Yeah,
Leader of the opposition.
It really
it's the
is.
hardest job in
but,
politics.
you know, he's again, like, he could be worse. It could be like John Turner in the 1988 election, where the party was ousting him during the campaign. So he could, you know, take some comfort in that. That's
Well,
not
it
happening.
may happen. You're assuming it doesn't, right? I mean, sorry, I didn't jump in. That's one thing that a couple things I would disagree with, I guess. One is I don't know if it's going to be gone in a month, because I don't see any indication that the folks who are complaining are going to be satisfied by him more or less passing a review at their convention, because I don't think this was really an organic response to the London results.
It's been brewing?
Well, I don't know if it's been brewing. I think it's people who are looking for an excuse to make their views known and to cause some headaches for them. If you look at the folks who've been involved, I mean, the London people definitely are part of that, and maybe it was prompted by the result, although these are the same London people, more or less, who popped up previously against John Tory and others, so you wonder who's kind of behind that. But look, the people who we've seen kind of pulling some strings here, you know, you've got a couple of MPPs, Frank Cleese being the most obvious one, who, you know, who's had on and off bad relationship with Tim Hudak and who ran against him previously. You've got
Came second to him.
Came second to him, stronger than most people expected, and got a strong sort of social conservative following in their party. You've got, you know, to some degree, you've got Nick Kouvalis, who's best known for his role with Rob Ford, who has made no secret of his unhappiness with, you know, the people around Tim Hudak, as he's put it. I don't think these are people who were just suddenly got annoyed by the result. I think they're people who were waiting for an opportunity. And I don't see any evidence, based on what we've seen to date, that, you know, after the convention they're suddenly going to say, well, okay, now he's got his chance to go to the convention and to go to the election and have an easy run of it.
Would you put the current PC party president on the list of people who are deeply concerned about the leader's position right now?
Concerned as in they would like a different leader, or concerned
Yes.
as in I would say that he's not 100% behind Tim Hudak, based on what we've seen to date. And there's also this peculiar rumor that keeps flying around that he himself wants the job of party leader, which there does seem to be at least some grain of truth to. So it's a very peculiar situation where you've got that. But of course, it's important to note here that the party president is business partners with Nick Kouvalis, we mentioned before. So this is a very strange factionalized party right now, and I don't think it's a grassroots movement so much as it's a bunch of operators, and that does, at least to some extent, include the party president, yeah, from what we've seen.
Well,
Scott, why is it that, forgive me, Maria, I'm going to try this out. The day after the PCs win their first seat in Toronto in 14 years, and the verdict seemed to be in right away that the leader can't take any credit for that, it's all the local candidate. You think that's fair?
Well, I do think that's actually fair in this particular instance, in that Doug Holliday was very well known, popular in the area, former mayor of Etobicoke. So I do think that that's a case where he just carried the day because people knew him and they liked him, and that was that.
And Hudak had nothing to do with it.
Well, I mean, if you're going to say Hudak had something to do with that, then you have to say he has to take the blame for the other four too. Like, I don't see how you can separate. You can either give him credit for the one, but not the loss of the other four losses. So to my mind, these things are largely local, whether you win them or lose them, and they don't really reflect on the leader one way or the other. But, you know, to sort of what Adam was saying about the movement to oust him, the thing that seems completely unproductive about it is that this particular chance of having a leadership review at the convention really had no chance for success to begin with. It's like they decided that they were going to move this thing forward. There was nothing in the constitution of the party that allows for a snap leadership review. Like, that's just not the way the rules work.
It's only supposed to happen after you lose an election, right?
Right, and he had
And they
that,
did that.
and they did that, and he passed his thing.
80% of the vote.
I think it was 78.
78.7, yeah.
But he did what he had to do. He's waiting for a general election, and he's been basically laying out policy for more than a year now that's geared towards a general election. So the time for them to sort of road test whether or not Tim Hudak can become premier is at the next general election. It's not now, and it's not by elections, and this kind of movement only was ever going to serve to undermine him, I think.
Maria, you wanted to say.
Well, I think that maybe this is perhaps not an exercise in trying to get Tim Hudak out, but just to kind of make him eat humble pie and say, yes, perhaps I'm not doing what I should be doing to win. Maybe I'm not putting or doing the best I can to ensure that we win the next election. So perhaps these are a few members who don't necessarily want to kick him out. They just want him to change what he's doing. And just going back to the party president, this was a guy who when he ran for that position at the AGM in Niagara Falls, his motto was, "Are you tired of losing elections?" So, and he put a lot of money and effort into that campaign for an unpaid position. So I'm not saying that he's interested in the job, but I'm saying that he's very serious about that party
Well,
and
you're not
running
saying
it.
he is, but everybody else is. And I hear he's even got a riding picked out. But
He's
anyway.
denied it. He's denied it.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's very interesting what's going on in the PC party right now, and whether they come out of this unscathed will be very interesting too.
Just for fun, with all these disclaimers we've uttered about by-elections and so on, the one certainty we can draw from all of this is that leadership reviews are utterly meaningless, because Hudak won a year ago, I think 78% plus or minus in his review, and now a year and a half later he's facing a revolt. In Quebec, you mentioned Quebec politics, Pauline Marois famously won about a 95% leadership review when she was in opposition, and about 6 or 12 months later a massive party revolt was brewing, suppressed, and now she's the Premier of Quebec. So you never know with these things.
We don't quite have, though, a Jean Chrétien, Paul Martin situation here, right? Where there's somebody nipping at the heels of the current leader to get him out. I mean, I don't hear anybody saying, we got to get rid of Tim Hudak because we're unambiguously for that guy right over there, right? So there's no obvious heir apparent. And yet there is this undertow constantly that's following Hudak wherever he goes. How do you explain that?
That's what makes this so incoherent, right? Is that there is no obvious person to go in. The people who whose names occasionally come up, Vic Fideli, the MP from North Bay, you'll hear his name occasionally. I've seen nothing to suggest he's particularly lobbying for the job or wants it. Christine Elliott's name comes up. There's some you hear mixed accounts of how interested she is or whether she's completely 100% supportive or not. But again, she doesn't seem to be pushing for it in the short term.
There's nobody who's stolen the party away from Hudak in the way that Martin did from Chrétien.
So what happens at the head of leadership? Somebody might squeak in. I mean, I suppose if you're looking at it, let's say that the Richard Ciano party president theory is correct. I'm not saying that it necessarily is. Maybe that might be why he'd look at it and say, well, with only 20% support coming in, I might be able to win this thing because there's no clear successor. The obvious danger for them is that if they don't win the next election, there is no obvious successor for them. And with all the turmoil and so on, you wonder who'd want the job. You wonder, what party membership would be like. And it's the kind of thing where you could see this party facing a real ugly period after if they do lose the next election, and there's all kinds of turmoil before, because they seem to have created a culture here where nobody is satisfied with anybody. Nobody's ready to rally around anybody.
But my question, Martin, is what do they want? When people are upset, they say, Tim Hudak's doing a bad job of X, Y, and Z. What's the X, Y, and Z?
What he's doing wrong, you mean?
Yeah.
Why are they unhappy? Oh, that's a different. I think Hudak has some liabilities and or limitations. I don't think that's going to disqualify him as leader in the foreseeable future. But what's bugging people is that he's not connecting with Ontarians. He's not.
What does that even mean, though?
Okay, he's not does not come across as especially authentic on television, for example. He is overly scripted. He tends to rehearse and really work hard at getting his press lines right. He compares unfavorably, I would say, and I'm not trying to be ideological here, because I'm paid to watch them. It's my job, day in and day out. He compares unfavorably to both Andrea Horwath and Kathleen Wynne on authenticity. They come across, even though Andrea Horwath reads her lines a lot too, they come across as more genuine. Tim Hudak tries too hard. So that's one big thing. I think his policies perhaps are not a great fit for Ontario right now, barring the kind of post-NDP rebellion that we saw in 1995. So I think he has a few things going against him. He's not raising a lot of money either.
Go ahead.
I agree with much of the problem with Tim Hudak. I think probably everybody at this table has had the same conversation about him at some point, which is, why is it that he can't get the way he is off camera into the frame when he's on camera? Because if you talk to him off camera, he's this quite likable, quite easygoing guy who, he fits the sort of, would you want to have a beer or barbecue with this guy or whatever kind of qualification, which he really doesn't on TV. That being said, in fairness to him, the one thing to keep in mind here is that viewers of the show possibly accepted, this is not a province where people pay super close attention between elections. A lot of the negativity, I think, is still based on the first time they saw him in the 2011 campaign, where he ran a pretty bad campaign. I'm not saying he'll necessarily make a better impression next time, but I do think his only one shot, and all along has been this, is in the next campaign to reintroduce himself. And you can't really expect that opinions are going to shift heavily about him between elections. So to some extent, he's just paying for that first impression, and to say, how come he hasn't changed that? I think some people involved know that it's not as simple as just doing that.
Well, I think we all have a story like the one I'm about to tell, which I'll tell very briefly. I was on Manitoulin Island over the summertime for a little while, and I spoke to a guy who owns a candy store. So he's a small business person, he's around my age, small business person. You would think the natural constituent for a conservative leader. And I asked him, what do you think of Tim Hudak? And he said, don't like him. And I said, why not? And he said, that's the fakest smile I've ever seen. And going back to what you said before about how if he were on camera the way he is off camera, he'd be a different guy. Surely they've told him this. Surely his people say, can't you be more like you are off camera, on camera? Why isn't it happening?
Well, I have seen them get rid of some of the photos where he's smiling. I mean, after the election, I mean, it was on the bus during the election, him smiling with his wife and child. And then post-election, when they had their AGM, the photos of him were very, more gravitas. He'd sit in an armchair and sort of look at you very authoritatively. So I think they tried to kind of, they got that. They got that wasn't working and people didn't like it, and so I think they tried to change it. But I'm not really sure why he's not relaxing a bit in front of the camera, because he's even before the cameras start rolling, he's joking around with the reporters. It's really difficult for me to see why he can't dial it down a bit with the scripting, and I think he recognizes that as a failure on his part. But it's something he really needs to stop doing if he's going to connect with voters. And I think the party realizes that too, because they're polling pretty well. It's just that when you get to the part where do you like Tim Hudak as leader, that's when they kind of fall down. So I think they feel like he might be dragging them down a bit. And if he does some kind of image makeover, like we saw with McGuinty after the '99 election, then maybe things will go more smoothly and they'll win next time around.
Scott, let's talk about the Premier. The Premier won her leadership convention in January. Easy money was she was going to lose a vote on the budget and be off to the polls by May, except it didn't happen. She managed to get an agreement with the NDP, and she lives to fight another day. How's the Premier doing?
Well, I think all that stuff was, big wins. I think I shouldn't say we all, but you're right. I think the money was on the fact that she'd be heading into election. The opposition would much rather go against an untested leader than let her have the time to familiarize herself with the people while being premier, get the benefits of incumbency. So all that was a big win. The strange thing is that not a lot has happened since then. And so we had the budget in the spring, and then obviously the legislature doesn't sit through the summer. But even through that period, there's been no real sense of what it is they're going to be doing when they come back. The one sort of major big policy area we've seen was at the end of the spring, they were very big on this idea for transit infrastructure in the GTA and the need for some, quote unquote, revenue tools, taxes or fees or what have you, to fund it. And then it kind of seems like that seems to be on the back burner now. So we have this whole thing recently where they've switched gears on the subway. I'm just not sure when they come back. We'll be very interested to see, what their plan is, particularly fiscally, because for a long time this Liberal government has said we need to have austerity, we need to clamp down spending. The Premier has given some signals that now it's more about job creation than austerity. So the question is, what does that mean? Are we away from the budgets where we're not giving pay raises to everybody, or are we now going to enter a period where the purse strings are kind of loosened and they're willing to spend some more? So all these questions are still out there, and I think we're really waiting to see when we get into this next session and into the next budget, what kind of a plan do they have to really move this thing forward? Because all the indications we're getting so far post this last budget is that they're possibly willing to shift a little on what used to be a very austerity-minded agenda.
Adam, can you tell whether the gas plant story, which, let's just remind everybody of the facts here, is costing almost $600 million to cancel that gas plant in Mississauga, which she did not make the decision to do, but which she has apologized for the bad planning that the Liberal government writ large did. Can you tell how much that chips away at her authenticity, popularity, competence, etc.?
I have to admit I struggle to figure that out, because it's one of those stories where from day to day I change my view on whether it's just sort of inside the bubble story, which people at Queen's Park only care about, or whether the rest of the province cares about it. I think the rest of the province does care about it to a point. I don't think they're riveted by the day-to-day committee hearings and what staffer made what decision at what time, but I think broadly it is a problem for them. I think one big problem for her, I don't think she's going to win or lose the next election based on the gas plants. I do think that what it has done is throw her off an awful lot. They would love to control the news cycle and have positive news out every day and be talking about her policies and not be facing questions about this. But it keeps popping up, and they've been on the defensive a lot, and that may partly explain why they haven't had more policy as well, because they've been spending so much time doing kind of issues management. I do think if they want it to go away, what they really need to do is talk more about new ideas and new policies, because in some measure it's filling a void. I mean, in September, if she doesn't give us interesting policies to talk about, most of the coverage will be about the gas plants. So, I don't mean to sound cynical about it, but that's usually what party leaders do in this situation. They're, to make these things go away, they shift the topic, and she's not really shifted the topic yet.
Can you tell Martin whether or not this has chipped away at the Liberals' ability to win the next election?
No, I can't, and I don't believe you can completely engulf Kathleen Wynne in this decision made by the McGuinty government by the time the next election rolls around in 6 months or a year or two from now. Otherwise, you would have an election, an absurd election, where the three main protagonists are Dalton McGuinty, Mike Harris, and Bob Rae fighting it out in 2014 or 15. I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think it will be a vote-determining issue. I think it will be lurking somewhere in the background, much like e-health was in the background in the last election. People remember Choco Bites. But they still voted Dalton McGuinty back into power. So no, I don't think it'll be a vote-determining. But I'm always wrong, so I will say in advance.
You're always wrong?
I will say in advance.
Why do I bother to buy the paper and read you if you're always wrong?
Or have me on the show. She did apologize, by the way, on this show after a bit of goading from you. No one else had succeeded in making her apology. She kept saying, I regret it, and then she finally said, I apologize, and hoped that would put it behind her. It hasn't. We're going to have an Auditor General's report in a few weeks, which is going to raise the dollar figure even higher. But it's a little more complex than the opposition pretends. The dollar amounts are money down the drain, it's true, but that's what a lot of people wanted, not just the opposition, but a lot of people in Etobicoke, for example, and other, the Tory opposition did not campaign against the gas plant cancellation in Etobicoke because that's what people wanted there. So it's a little more complex. Just on agenda, I'd say the transit was going to be the big one for them, transit infrastructure, which also has economic implications as an infrastructure strategy. But it's a hard sell, and I think Kathleen Wynne has done some good stuff on that. I think that the Tories and the NDP in particular have kind of taken the easy way out and tried to criticize and carp about making people pay a little more for transit. And I think that has slowed Kathleen Wynne even more than gas plants. I think she's realizing it's just, Scarborough by-election was an example of how hard it is to sell it to people, even though people are so frustrated by gridlock. Making the case is not easy. Closing the deal is hard.
We saw the other day, though, Maria, the opposition is still extremely fixated on the gas plant issue, to the extent that even when, I think it was an announcement about driver's license fees are going to go up next year a little bit, which they do from time to time, and the opposition, I think Peter Sherman of the Conservatives came out and said, aha, they're raising it to pay off for the gas plants because they got to find $600 million they didn't plan to find before. Is it a wise idea for the opposition to hone in so laser-like on this one issue so much? We've got contempt hearings, we've got constant press releases, we've got constant play on the gas plant issue. What do you think?
Well, if I were to be on their end of things, I would think this is great because unlike Orange, we can directly blame the government and the Premier for it. People understand that hydro bills are high and this is going to make them go even higher. So for them, it's a very tasty morsel, and they're going to keep using this tool again and again. It's ubiquitous in their news releases. All roads lead back to gas plants. So I can see why they're taking advantage of it.
But the question is, does that, you can beat this drum so many times that the public starts to tune it out. I don't know if that's happened. Maybe you do. I
think people are tuning out things like how many documents have been tabled and this ongoing infighting about what did people know when and did they approach the speaker about it. I think people generally don't care about that. They're not really in tune to it unless they're real political junkies. But I think they do get that they paid $600 million, maybe more. So once that AG's report comes out, if that's going to be a huge hit for the Wynne government, if it's substantially more than what we've already been told. So I'm not sure if I agree that I have my sense is that this will factor into the next election. Because it's something people can really identify as being a mistake that the Liberals made. I think it sort of encapsulates a lot of the scandals that have been around them, from Orange to e-health. This might be the straw that breaks the camel's back for them. But I agree. I think they're tuning out a lot of it, the minor stuff. But they still see like that $600 million and go, what happened?
We've got a few minutes to go here, and I want to just finish up on when we think this next election is going to take place. The bullet was dodged, as it were, for those who wanted to dodge it in the spring. Is there any reason to assume that there will be anything on the horizon before next spring's budget or throne speech or whatever that could necessitate an election? Adam?
No, there's not.
There is not.
I mean, it's possible. The only way we're going to have an election this fall, as far as anybody can tell, is if the Liberals themselves wanted one, because they don't even face a confidence vote necessarily in the House this fall. And my sense is they do not want to face an election this fall. There's certainly no indication they do. I do think there'll be one next spring. I think what we saw this year, I mean, one should be careful, because at this time last year, if you'd said, will there be an election in 2013, we would have said yes. But then there was a change in Liberal leadership. Nothing that dramatic is going to happen. I just don't see how they get past the next budget, in large part because there's some really tough decisions that will have to be made in that budget. And I don't see how they can get NDP support for it while remaining remotely true to what they think needs to be done for the province. And I just don't see it happening. So I think there will be an election in the spring, and I think we're kind of entering what may be a 6, 8, whatever month campaign pretty soon, because there's not that much policy being brought forward imminently. The legislature is really not functioning that well, and is unlikely to pass much of anything of substance. And all parties are now looking to next spring as a time. So I think we might have, part of me wishes we were starting the campaign, or having the campaign this fall, because you might as well get it over with. But I think we're going to see more of kind of a long runway.
Gotcha. That's our time, and you summed it up so brilliantly, I don't have to let any of the others comment on it. Well done. Okay. That's Adam Radwanski and Scott Stinson on the right-hand side of the table from the Globe and Mail and the National Post, respectively. Maria Babbage from the Canadian Press and Martin Redcon on the left-hand side of the table from the Toronto Star. Thanks so much for this update, everybody. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.